Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's session, which is Demystifying e-signatures, where we'll be analyzing the key elements involved in e-signatures so you can kind of understand all of the in and outs associated with using them. My name is Sarah Linderman. I'm in product marketing at Adobe, and I'm going to be taking you through the presentation today. I'd like to start just by giving you a preview of both today's session as well as making note that this is part of a larger series. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be doing demystifying. Coming up on January 26th, we have a session that is about powering digital transformation in education. Later in February, we have a session about getting started with Adobe Sign. That'll get into kind of setting your admin console up and getting started with understanding, using, and rolling the product out across your educational institution. We also have a bunch of on-demand content that's always available, and when we send out the follow-up email to this session, you'll be able to access the links to take you through to get to each of those on-demand pieces. In terms of today's session, though, as I mentioned, it's about demystifying e-signatures. We're going to be providing a quick overview of what Adobe Sign actually is. We will be discussing the ins and outs of e-signature legality. And then we'll kind of wrap up and move into a little bit of a Q&A session. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. All right, going paperless with Adobe Sign. Let's start with a quick reality check. Today, nearly 80% of the workflows on a typical campus, those could be student-facing workflows, staff-facing workflows, vendor-facing, they're paper-based. And this old school approach of printing things out, signing them, scanning them, emailing them back, it feels really archaic and really inefficient. And it involves a lot of steps. It's complicated, it's slow. For anyone who's involved in these workflows, and I'm sure you've been one of those individuals, it results in a whole lot of time spent doing admin work that I'm sure you would rather be spending otherwise. So what happens when you go digital? Well, you kill all those pain points that I mentioned. For each transaction, and we consider a transaction one document that's going out for signature, a school can save an average of an hour and a half of labor by going digital. And since you're spending time, since you're actually able to reduce a lot of the errors by going digital, you can reduce your overall processing time by up to 96%. And when you add up all the hard and soft costs, you realize an average savings of around $6 per transaction. Now, I know that sometimes that figure sounds shockingly high, but if you can contemplate all the things that go into it, it's really not. There's the cost of printer paper. There's the cost of running the printers, running the copiers, running the faxing, all of the equipment and the materials and the time that's rolled into that. You're able to cut all of that out. And one way to think about this, just kind of in a bigger way, is think about 20,000 forms. If you take those digital, that's savings of around $120,000 and over 30,000 labor hours, which is pretty incredible. What is Adobe Sign? What can you do with it? It's quite comprehensive. With Adobe Sign, you can quickly turn paper, Microsoft Office documents, or PDFs into fillable, signable forms. You can then easily send them out for e-signature with just a single click, and recipients can sign them from anywhere using a web browser. Quick note there, people often ask, when I sign a document for signature, does the person who's signing need to have an Adobe account, an app, a login? Nope, they do not have to have any of that. All they need, again, is the web browser where they can quickly open the document and sign it. All of those documents are going to be protected with very strict security measures, and then they can be accessed and tracked and managed from anywhere in real time, which for anyone who's working on the administrative side of things and kind of the one who has to make sure these documents are getting completed, getting signed, this is a huge, huge benefit. Adobe Sign's also built to integrate with other key systems on your campus, so you don't have to worry as much about the implementation challenge of bringing in a new system and making sure that it's going to cooperate with your other systems or provide a user-friendly experience. And that's a big benefit that we like to talk about. There's obviously a lot of competitors that we face. So, what is it that makes Adobe Sign a great product for education compared to all the others out there? Well, there's 5 points that we like to pull out specifically. The first one is Adobe's trust and credibility. We've been working in education for over 20 years with the products like Adobe Sign and also through a lot of our Creative Cloud products. So we know this space really well. We know what it takes to work with and serve education customers. And we are really invested in and dedicated to making sure that you have the support and the implementation services you need so that you feel you have a really trusted partner when it comes to putting Adobe Sign in place. The second point is ease of use. It's easy for the sender, it's easy for the signer. And that's important because when it comes to education, we understand that you have a really widely varied audience in terms of comfortability with technology. And we want something that's going to work for everybody. And we believe that Adobe Sign is a product that delivers that experience. The third point is one that I mentioned on the last slide, and that is the integrations. We're designed to integrate very seamlessly with a lot of other IT systems, and in particular, if your school happens to work with any Microsoft system, Adobe Sign is particularly amazing because we are Microsoft's only preferred e-signature solution. That means that if you have a school that's used to working within Teams, within SharePoint, Adobe Sign integrates right into that so that they can use the features and functionality of Adobe Sign without having to leave those environments that they're already really comfortable working in. Just a couple more points to cover off on. The next one is this intuitive workflow control. So our workflow management, it's easy to use for everybody. So users like faculty or staff or admins, they can use the visual design tools that we have very quickly and easily to build and test and refine workflows themselves. They don't need to have coding expertise or experience. Anyone at the institution, regardless of their tech abilities, can really tailor, automate, create those signing workflows without needing to be a technical expert, which is huge. Because no school, I'm sure, has the IT staff and time to support that all. And then final point, which is probably one of the most important ones on here, is the compliance. Our Adobe Sign products meet the highest levels of global security and compliance requirements. We actually use the same technologies and security engineering processes that are relied on by financial institutions, governments, of course, educational institutions all around the world. So you can rest assured that everything is being done very safely and security, which is really important when you think about the type of student data that's being run through these workflows. All right, so where can you use Adobe Sign? Pretty much everywhere, that's my answer. It's a solution that's built to support workflows all across your campus or institution. It's really great for operational workflows, things like vendor agreements, very handy with staff management needs. So if you're working with a lot of onboarding forms, which you most undoubtedly are, academic research submissions, if you're on the higher ed side of things, great for that. And it's also super valuable for student or alumni facing workflows. You can think about things like course management or donor forms. And in all of these cases, when you're using those paper-based forms and the wet signatures, it requires tons of time, cross-coordination between departments, individuals. It's literally a lot of legwork. But when you go paperless with Adobe Sign, you're going to simplify those routing procedures. You're going to reduce trips to offices or campus for everybody, and you're going to get things accomplished just a lot faster. It's a better experience for the whole campus community all the way around. All right, moving on. So let's get into the thick of things and kind of the meat of why you probably joined us today. That's kind of analyzing the elements of trust and identity. So what we're going to talk about today is the importance of signer identification and analyzing key elements for e-signatures. Now, we've included 3 lesson slides in this, because education. So pay careful attention to those. Those are going to be mixed in. And like I said, in the end, we'll do a little bit of Q&A. So let's go ahead and move into that. So Adobe, and in particular Document Cloud, have a really long history of building and leading with trust. Obviously, you noticed that I talked about that in the last session. And we share this trust by creating new open source standards that advance the overall experience with digital documents and e-signatures. We did this with PDF in 1992, way back when. We did this with the Certified Document Service, which is now known as the Adobe Approved Trust List in 2005. And as of 2019, we implemented the Cloud Signature Consortium open standard for creating really highly secure, trusted cloud signatures with Adobe Sign. This is an especially important point because we have this history of leading with trust. It's not proprietary. We don't create closed environments that only we're able to profit from. Instead, what we want to try to do is really drive innovation across the whole global market so everybody can benefit. So today, our digital world, as I'm sure you're well aware of, is full of risk. Most of us, unfortunately, are too familiar with the importance of using strong passwords, things like two-factor authentication, and the never-ending attempts by cyber criminals to phish or clone or otherwise gain access to our data for not so great purposes. So I think it's important to start with a story about how I was actually able to forge an identity with a simple written signature. This goes back a while. I was 11 years old. And at this time, which was before school records were digitized, if a student was absent for any reason, you had to bring a written note from a parent to excuse the absence. And then the school administrator would visually compare the signature on that absence note to the signature card, which was signed by your parent at the beginning of each year. The way this story goes is that one year when I was handed that annual signature card to bring home for a parent signature, I remember looking at the card and thinking, it's probably just easier if I sign it myself. So I did. And for the remainder of all my school year, this forgery scheme worked flawlessly. According to the school, my signature always matched no matter what note I forged my name on for many, many absences. So, identity fraud. Now, as you're likely aware of, e-signatures speed the pace of transactions. They reduce paper. When used effectively, they can securely transform operations. But unfortunately, it's not just as simple as replacing wet ink signatures with electronic ones. And this is why I want to spend a little bit of time unpacking so you can understand the two key complementary parts, legality and risk. So important. The most common use for e-signatures is related to completing agreements. Thus, what makes an e-signature legally binding is about contract law. If challenged in court, such as if someone denies that they signed or denies that they signed a particular agreement, it can be really expensive for your educational institution. And as with any transaction, there's also the potential for fraud as well as the risk of cybercrime to be considered. To keep things simple, analyzing your e-signature workflows means breaking them down into a few different elements that I'm going to go through here. So first is the type of e-signature that's required to form a legally valid agreement. Second is document category. That's things like contracts with legal or regulatory requirements or those which are at higher risk or higher value to your organization. The third is the knowledge of the signer, by which I mean, how well do you know the signer? Are they internal? Are they external? Are they unknown by your organization? And finally, signer identification, which means which method did you use to identify each e-signature from each signer on that document? So let's start with lesson 1. Outside of the US at this time, countries around the world share a really similar approach to e-signature definitions, legal validity, and technology. And this includes providing stronger legal weight to highly secure and often regulated digital signatures. This type of e-signature is called a digital signature because of the use of a digital certificate that is bound to the signature field with cryptography. However, the type of e-signature you choose is often a matter of balancing risk versus cost. This is because the more secure e-signatures, which includes digital signatures, also come with higher costs and more complex signer identification processes. So generally speaking, there's 4 types of e-signatures with progressively higher levels of security for each. Your first is the simple graphical e-signatures. This also includes when you use fill and sign if you're in Adobe Acrobat. Then you've got an enhanced e-signature, which includes some type of signer authentication, such as two-factor methods. That might include a phone PIN, OTP. At Adobe, we refer to these as premium authentication methods. An e-signature with some signer identity verification, such as using SSO with a trusted digital ID, that's your next level, that's advanced. But please note that the term advanced e-signature is a European Union legal term, but the description is also a good fit for this webinar. Finally, the most secure type of e-signature that you can have today, which is a digital signature backed by a qualified digital certificate. Now, again, I'm using European technology or terminology here, but that's because the definition has not made it into US law, well, yet at least. There are other legal terms that are often used around the world for this type of highly regulated e-signature, such as secure, reliable, or trusted. And in many countries, this type of e-signature is considered legally equivalent to a traditional handwritten signature. It's important to mention one area of confusion is around the use of a self-signed certificate. Although a self-signed certificate does technically create a digital signature because it uses the same encryption technology to bind the signature to the document, it completely misses the point about trusted identity. Thus, a self-signed certificate is actually equivalent to just a simple electronic signature. Kind of like if you printed your own passport as evidence that you are who you say you are. So as I mentioned, there's another type of e-signature, which is the cloud signature. But what is it? And why is it important? A cloud signature is a digital signature where your digital signing certificate is stored in the cloud. What this means is that once your identity is verified by an accredited third party, which for some can be actually done entirely remotely and in real time, you can then apply a highly secure, trusted digital signature direct from your mobile. Now, given the obvious difficulties of meeting face-to-face nowadays, cloud signatures offer a huge productivity boost for easily obtaining legal, secure e-signatures almost anywhere in the world. But it's not just the convenience that makes cloud signatures so important, it's the way that they're implemented that really matters. And as a long-term member of the Cloud Signature Consortium, Adobe has spent years of investment to help create the global ETSI standard for cloud signing. And you might be wondering why we go to all this effort. It's because we genuinely believe that creating a scalable, open standard is the best approach for our customers and innovation for e-signature technology. All right, let's talk next about document category. Another key step when analyzing your e-signature process is to, like I said, categorize your documents. So that could be identifying those with legal or regulatory requirements. Also, document categories that include high-value transactions ideally should be associated to higher risk profiles. However, most, like more than 50% of your documents and your corresponding e-signatures are actually pretty low risk. A few other considerations when you're categorizing your documents include the following. What's the risk appetite of your organization or your department? Does the agreement need to be signed in a different jurisdiction? And what is the impact to your organization if a problem occurs? Just some good food for thought. Given the rise in digitization and the threat of cybercrime and bad actors and so on, it's reasonable to anticipate that how your organization views risk today will change over time. And that's okay, because we're here to evolve with you on that. All right, lesson 2, know your signer. To deliver this lesson, it's helpful to explain how we break down identification and e-signing to signer verification, authentication, and authorization, which are probably questions that you might have brought today. Like, what do these things even mean and how are they different? So verification. That's when a signer's identity is thoroughly vetted with documentation, face-to-face meetings, etc. This is similar to when you first open a new bank account or join a new organization. Authentication. That's what happens when a signer confirms who they are when related to an e-signature. This usually means confirming something you own, something you know, and or something you are, such as through biometric information. And the last one is authorization. And this is specifically related to signatures. It means that the signer agrees to the terms of a contract by choosing to place a signature, written or electronic, on the document. So putting this into lesson 3, what is the type of signer? A signer who is an employee of your school or university organization, this is also called an internal signer, may be allowed to just authenticate and authorize a signature without the use of a digital certificate. Figuring that the employee's identity was thoroughly verified during onboarding, this may be entirely acceptable from a risk standpoint for your school. But as you're aware, most e-signature use cases also include external signers, such as outside counsel, a known vendor, or a new student when it comes to education. And in these cases, you may also already have verified the signer's identity, like if you have an enrolled student, and issued them a specific digital ID tied to your student identity system. So then, depending on the use case, it may be fine to only require this external signer to authenticate their identity via your identity system and authorize their signature. However, e-signature analysis related to knowing your signer really comes into play when considering what level of ID verification is needed to mitigate risk for an unknown signer. And if the use case at hand requires or a best practice, then an unknown signer's identity first be verified by a trusted third party, or if a qualified digital signature is also needed. All right, let's talk about, slide issues. Let's talk about identification solutions within specifically Adobe Sign. In Adobe Sign, you can add more direct forms of ID verification, such as government ID, which a predictive machine learning algorithm that analyzes government-issued ID documents at the point of signing. You can also use those certificate-based digital signatures that include identification by a third-party trust service provider. As you can see here, not all identity assurance methods are created equal. And even if you use a combination of identification methods that are individually inherently weak, there's still a lot of risk that you're building into the process. This level of risk might be acceptable for some of your non-critical forms or processes. But in reality, the cyber criminals or bad actors are out there waiting for an opportunity. And as we are all aware, the need for security always seems to go up, not down. So just something to think about as you consider which approaches you want to put into place. A little bit more on signer identification, which is obviously something we've been talking a lot about. Why do we keep talking about it? Why is it so important? Because how a signer is identified really does have a direct impact on many of the risks that are associated with e-signatures. So stronger signer identification methods, that might be those that are used for digital signatures, they increase the cost and complexity of each e-signature, but they also add benefit for added legal and security protections. So depending on the type of signer and other risk factors defined by your school, how each signer is identified should be ideally appropriately balanced with the level of security that's needed to mitigate the risk for every e-signature that you're going to be putting onto a specific document. I know a lot of this is pretty complex. There's a lot of different ways of looking at this. There's a lot of factors involved. But if you can figure it out by some tools that we have available to use, then analyzing your e-signature workflows is not so challenging. And in our experience, when you compare it to paper and all the things that can go wrong there, all the errors and misplacements, etc., digital is actually way easier to secure and manage over time. And that's why we created the Adobe e-signature framework. It's publicly available. It's a spreadsheet-based tool that's designed to help departments and teams analyze the connections between the type of e-signature and document category, how well you know the signer, and the type of method used to identify the signer. So when you use this framework properly, it can really augment the existing risk analysis processes that you already might have in place. It can help your organization think more critically about e-signatures, and it provides a basis for more productive internal discussions about your e-signature policies. So it's a really great tool. And this is something that we're going to be placing in the email that you'll receive after you finished watching this webinar today. So looking forward to sending you that, and hopefully you'll find it to be a really useful tool. And that is actually all I have for today. I know it's a lot of information. We appreciate you attending. I hope you took a lot of away from this. And if you have more questions and you'd like to get into it, then please stay on the line, and we'll be moving into a Q&A session so you can get your questions addressed. So thank you again, and I will hand it over to my colleague Mike for doing the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for joining in today. A lot of great questions from our Q&A pod here. So I'll get right to it. And what I can't answer myself, Lori, I'll pass over to you to maybe kind of add some more color commentary on it. So we had a couple of questions first on how can we authenticate the identity of signers if the signer doesn't have an Adobe account? So it's a great question, and actually comes up a lot. And the great news is whoever needs to sign a document, especially if they're an external signer to your institution, never needs to have an Adobe account. So we're basically checking their identity based on some of those options that Lori talked about, whether it's email address, we can do two-factor authentication using an SMS kind of type code. We can do things even more advanced, but they never need to actually log in. As long as we have their email address, that's the first layer of identity. And then depending on how the workflow in Adobe Sign is set up, they can prove their identity using a couple other methods. And Lori, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that a little bit more, just in terms of, I know you covered this in the presentation a bit, but just in terms of when identity is important.
Identity is always important, but it really matters whether or not how much risk is built into that particular signing workflow. So if it's a really low risk scenario, then you balance it based on what the cost would be and what the likelihood of something going wrong. I think I saw something about signatures on IEPs. In theory, you should know who the student is and know who the parent is, and they're to my knowledge, in the US, I don't know of any legal requirement for a type of e-signature on an IEP, but that is really for your own department to decide what the right level of identification is. We just make it all possible.
Yeah, exactly. And it all goes back to the level of risk that as an organization that you have, depending on the type of form that needs to be filled out. There's very few forms, especially in the United States, that have specific requirements on the type of signature. In Europe, it's a little bit different with the various types of digital signatures. But yeah, it all depends on the type of form and how in-depth you want the identity authentication to be. Another good question was, is the legality of a signature, is it because of how it shows up on the document using kind of like the different graphical elements that Adobe Sign provides, such as like the actual signature, drawing, the underlining, and the date, or is it the actual process behind how we're capturing that signature? And the answer for that is definitely not the type of graphic. The graphic is just the proof that the document was signed. The legality, the easy way that I like to think of it is it's about the three I's. Three I's are the identity that we just talked about, the identity of the signer, the intent that the signer is in fact actively signing something, so we can't automatically attach a signature. They have to literally click a button or use their mouse to draw their signature or do some sort of action. And then the third I is the integrity, that how are we storing that signature? What kind of proof do we have? So the graphic is a nice way to show that the document was signed, but to meet all of the most common legal requirements, it's about meeting those three different categories. That there's identity involved in this, whether it's as simple as an email address that we know, or something as advanced as a digital signature with a certificate. The intent that someone actually did sign it on their own will, and that we're storing it in what we call the audit trail. The audit trail basically stores all the details of when the document was signed, the IP address of the signer, what identity was used, if they met all of the identification requirements. And this is really what makes an e-signature legal. And Lori, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else onto that one.
Um, Legality is a complex topic. We actually have a full kit of legality guides in the Adobe's Trust Center under Document Cloud, because legality is entirely different depending on the country. So there are times where, for example, Mike mentioned in Europe, certain specific digital signatures are required. There's another level I mentioned in my presentation about an advanced e-signature, which has certain requirements. And a lot of these definitions are actually worldwide. So if you're signing something outside the U.S., this is why we created some of the legality guides, give yourself, your legal department, a jump on understanding what laws might create legal e-signatures. Now, in the U.S., we also have a U.S. guide, I mean, I'm seeing laws beginning to change, but we'll see. We'll see. I'd be real surprised if digital signatures didn't come into play fairly soon in terms of being required for certain things.
Great information. Another question here is, how can we validate an e-signature? So for example, if it's been used in a medical field, or ISO 13485, which is used commonly in kind of medical type forms and practices. So Lori, I'll turn this one to you so you can kind of give a little bit more details on, I guess, how do we, when something is signed, how do we actually validate it after the fact?
Well, we would open up the signature panel. We have videos on this in terms of the digital, it's actually for digital signatures, but when you click on the digital signature, it'll show the panel and the audit trail, and you can see where, what type of certificate was used, the date and time of signing, and that actually literally ties the e-signature, that digital signature, to that signer. But in terms of validating any other type of e-signature, it's in the audit trail. So there is a service called Government ID I mentioned, and that does give a signer identification report, identity report. But otherwise, you know, you've given a one-time password, or I don't know, maybe use LexisNexis, or was it knowledge-based authentication to authenticate the signer. So this is captured in the audit trail, but deep details you have to keep digging in.
Yeah, great. Another question here. This is an easy answer that I can happily answer. Basically saying that their organization leverages mobile SMS kind of multi-factor authentication using a one-time PIN code. And the question is, does Adobe Sign support that as an authentication method for identity? And we definitely do. So when you are defining your send for signature flow, you basically choose what kind of identity do you want used, and you can choose SMS-based activity. So you plug in the recipient's mobile phone number, they'll get an automated SMS with the one-time code that they need to plug in before they're able to access the document to sign it. So that's one of the various ways that we can prove identity, and of course that record is captured in the audit trail afterwards to show that they successfully passed the mobile multi-factor authentication. Another question here came in asking just a little bit more details on what a digital identity is and how does that work together with an e-signature. So I'll turn that one to you, Lori, as well.
Sure. This one, I think I'm a little more in my bailiwick. A digital identity, or digital ID, is similar to a passport in electronic form. It allows you to securely prove that you are who you say you are. Each digital ID is backed by a digital certificate issued by a trusted third party, such as a bank, educational institution, or government, after they've verified that you are who you say you are. Then you just need to authenticate your identity using PIN, Face ID, one-time passcode, etc., to have access to secured services such as educational resources or citizen services. For example, I actually have multiple digital IDs, like for my bank accounts or even for Adobe.
Yeah, great. Let's see here, a lot of questions, just looking for the ones that are going to be the most common for everybody here to benefit from. So this is definitely a lot more relevant for those outside of North America, especially for those in Europe. So the differences between AES and QES, which is the advanced e-signature and qualified e-signature. So those are two different types of digital signatures, and I know we went through these pretty quickly in the presentation, but Lori, maybe if you want to just jump back to those, the differences between AES and QES and when the two of them would need to be used.
Well, interestingly enough, I didn't queue up all my details on an advanced. I think it, if I'm correct, it needs to be linked definitively to the signer. The signer needs to be in control of the in control at all times. And to be honest, if I go much farther, I'm probably going to fumble it. The fundamental difference with a QES is that it's the highest level of signature, and it is always a digital signature. And a QES is a concept that is worldwide. I mentioned in the presentation, they're called different things. They're called certified, they're called reliable, they're called trusted, but I see them in laws, not that I can read every language, but we have translated to English, laws around the world, certainly in the legality guides. And this is why I really believe that this concept will be coming at some point to the US.
Yeah, awesome. We had another question asking about the timestamp. So when a document is signed and we're recording the timestamp, what part does the timestamp play in terms of making the signature legal? So I can talk about that one a little bit. So as I mentioned before, the foundational thing that makes an e-signature legal are those three I's: the identity, the intent, and the integrity. So when you're thinking of those three principles of an e-signature's legality, recording when the signature took place and where are we storing that data, that's part of both the intent and the integrity. So when we're storing a timestamp of when the document was signed, that helps prove the intent to say, yes, this person signed this document at this time, and then because we're also documenting when it was signed in the audit report, that also supports the integrity component. So the timestamp is obviously very important in terms of the overall legality of any signature. A follow-up question to the AES, the advanced e-signatures, does that use a third-party certificate authority? So I think another question right up your alley, Lori.
That one I can answer more definitively. I'm terribly embarrassed that it's not coming off the top of my head for all the minor requirements for an advanced. Adobe recommends using an advanced digital certificate to sign with an advanced signature, and this is based on EIDAS or European Union law. It is not required in the letter of the law, but we believe that the best way to meet these requirements is to use an advanced certificate.
Okay, perfect.
The e-signature framework is literally in the Adobe Trust Center. I saw one question there. You do have to fill in your name, but we're not using it for any demand gen purposes. It's just to understand who's using it and who's and so we can get some feedback. I'm sorry, I saw one of the other one. Can you share a link to the U.S. and international legal guides for reference? And there is that is also in the Adobe Trust Center under Document Cloud.
Yeah, and for anyone that has a hard time finding it, it's literally adobe.com/trust.html, and we'll be able to get a link of that out to people as a follow-up as well. So it looks like those were most of the questions that came in. If we didn't get to any of your specific questions, because I think it might be really unique to your situation, we'll definitely get back to you directly. Lori, if there was anything else that you wanted to maybe kind of follow up on that we didn't have enough time on.
I see one that's actually really fun. I think it's from Matt, the school signature card. By the way, that was quite real, and friends actually asked me to sign their parents' signature on a regular basis, so I'm really good at signing a variety of kids' parent signatures. So technically, how would it make it any better? Well, it depends how you verify that the signature is actually coming from the parent. Now, of course, at any time, a student could very easily go and take their parents' email address and use that. Sure, they could sign something, but that also would give a trail, and the parent hopefully is managing their email address and doesn't leave their computer open and so on. Or, for example, hopefully you don't have students who are going in there and creating email addresses just so that they can sign off on a parent absence card. Yeah, you can spoof it, but it's a lot harder digitally versus me signing one signature card at the beginning of the year.
And then to add on to that, I mean, if the school is very wary of students spoofing parents, then you can definitely use kind of a two-factor authentication. If
Absolutely.
the teacher, for example, sending it out has the mobile phone number of the parents, and they can use that way, when someone tries to sign it, they'll get an SMS with the one-time code. So hopefully the student doesn't also have the parent's phone at hand. But I mean, there's always going to be people trying to spoof the systems, so it's all about adding as many ways to prevent that as possible. One last question. Actually, a couple people asked this. If we have any training sessions on how to prepare fillable forms to get them to be used in Adobe Sign. So we actually do have quite a lot of on-demand and also upcoming sessions talking more about the basics of using Adobe Sign and how to set up documents for signature. So I would say definitely take a look at what we have on demand for that, and also stay tuned for more of our kind of introduction to Adobe Sign, the foundational concepts of how to use the product itself. That'll definitely cover those kind of things. And of course, we'll be happy to reach out to anybody directly with questions that we can help you out, learn a little bit more about using Adobe Sign.
And Cecile, it looks like you were wondering if there's someone you can email. If you have any specific questions you want us to follow up with, just drop your email into the chat pod and somebody will get back to you for sure.
And with that, let me hand this back to Sarah. We'll wrap up. Those were most of the questions. And again, if you had any other questions we didn't get to, we will get back to you directly here. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Sarah, back to you.
Yes, give me 1 second. I'm pulling something up. I see also questions coming in about can you access the recordings, where do you access the recordings, etc. So I am grabbing that link and we'll drop that into the chat pod too. Here we go. Okay, yes, we will make sure that we give follow-ups of all of this and to get back to any specific questions. All right, so wrapping up, I have a few next steps here. Firstly, just checking out some of our resources. We have put, Phil, go ahead and we can drop those links in. So to the Trust Center that we've mentioned, to some other security and compliance related links, plenty of reading up on that. And then we'll also drop in the link that will allow you to go and find all of the webinars that we have available, both so you can sign up for future events and so you can access the recording from today as well as past events so that you can use that and also share it around with any colleagues you think might be interested. And that kind of leads me to point two, is about the on-demand webinars and staying tuned for next year's events. You'll receive all the information on that. And then finally, if there's more information that you would like, if you would like a custom demo, if you want to get into some more complex questions, either contractor rep if you have one, or again, I see that some people have gone ahead and dropped their emails into the chat. Just go ahead and do that, and we will make sure that somebody will get back to you directly. With that, I will go ahead and wrap things up and would just say thank you so much for joining us today, for being a great audience and putting all these questions in there and staying super engaged. And thank you, Lori and Mike and team. Great session, and thanks to all who joined.